Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce the fat old pig we all have to endure today. Those words dropped, heavy as a blade twisting straight into my heart. In the middle of a glittering banquet hall, under expensive crystal lights, I stood there in my emerald silk gown, a dress worth more than many people's monthly salary, and watched Kyla, my son's new bride, raise her champagne glass toward me with a smile full of contempt. Beside her, the wealthy Benton family burst into laughter, applauding as if that insult were an excellent joke. But then her father's face, Charles Benton, suddenly turned as white as paper. "Wait, aren't you Dr. Celeste Rowe, the new CEO of Benton Rowe Holdings?" The crowded room fell silent at once. The music stopped. All that remained was the clink of glasses and the choked breaths of those who had just mocked me. "Hello, everyone. My name is Celeste Rowe, and this is the story of the day I was called a pig at my own son's wedding, a wedding I paid for, down to the last cent. From the final rose petal to every gold-plated chair in the most luxurious ballroom in Buckhead, Atlanta. $300,000, exactly that. But before that moment of humiliation happened, let me take you back 2 hours earlier, when I still believed that Jordan, the only son I had raised for 20 years, still truly loved his mother. To understand why a woman like me, a doctor of economics, a successful businesswoman, a widow who built an entire empire after her husband's death, could stand still, swallow that insult, and say nothing. You need to know where this story began. The story of the man I loved and lost, of the empire we built together, of the child I sacrificed everything to protect, and of the painful truth that sometimes the greatest love is the very thing that can leave the deepest wounds. If you think this moment is bitter enough already, then wait until you see what really caused everything to fall apart. In the next part, I will tell you about the 2 hours before that, when I still believed in a happy family, before the cruel truth had the chance to reveal itself. Come with me. 2 hours before my daughter-in-law called me a pig, I was standing in the dressing room of the largest Baptist church in Atlanta, straightening Jordan's bow tie, my only son. "Thanks for everything, Mom," Jordan said, his eyes looking elsewhere. "You know, this wedding is really expensive." $300,000. But I had never counted. I had never counted when it came to my son. Jordan fumbled with the cufflinks, the same pair Richard, his father, had worn on our wedding day 32 years ago. Richard died of cancer when Jordan was 12. "Your father would be so proud," I said softly. But a few hours later, as I stood in the luxurious Buckhead ballroom, listening to his wife's family publicly mock me, I realized that things like pride were a luxury I no longer had the strength to hold on to. To understand this story, you need to know about Richard Rowe. We met when I was 26, having just received my PhD in economics from Emory University. At the time, Richard was an ambitious real estate entrepreneur with nothing but a small office in Midtown Atlanta and a dream of building an empire of his own. I was a market analyst, the one who saw opportunities others overlooked. "Celeste," Richard once said on a night when we worked until 3 a.m, "you are not just my wife. You are my partner, in every sense." And so we joined forces to build Benton Rowe Holdings, the name formed from Charles Benton, the initial investor, and Richard Rowe, the visionary. Every building in Atlanta, every contract, every piece of land we turned into gold. Until 19 years ago, when Jordan was 12, Richard was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. 6 months later, I became a widow. "Celeste," Richard whispered on his final night, "you have to promise me. Whatever you say, I will do. Do not let them take what we built. The Benton family thinks the company is theirs because their name is on the sign, but this company belongs to you and to our son. But I only own 30% of the shares. Then buy more, slowly, patiently." He tried to smile through the pain. "You are the smartest person I know. They will underestimate you because you are a widow, because you are a black woman in real estate. Let them underestimate you. Then show them they were wrong. And I kept my promise. 15 years. By day, I was Dr. Celeste Rowe, strategic consultant for real estate firms across the Southeast. By night, I was a single mother trying to raise Jordan to become the man his father had hoped for, and in every spare moment, I hunted for shares. When Charles Benton's nephew needed seed money for a startup, I bought 3%. When his sister got divorced, I bought 5%. When minor shareholders wanted out, I was always their first call. Year by year, percentage by percentage, 30 to 35 to 40 to 47%. Then last year, when old Mr. Benton died and his distant grandchildren wanted to sell their inheritance, I crossed the threshold of 51%. Last week, the board of directors voted to appoint me as CEO. My official start date, this Monday. But before becoming CEO, I had to walk into my son's wedding, his wedding to a girl from that very same Benton family. And there, everything began to crumble. People often ask me, why would a woman like you, highly educated, accomplished, powerful, allow herself to be treated that way? The answer is very simple. Because when it comes to our children, we are no longer CEOs, no longer doctors, no longer empire builders. We are only mothers. And once you are a mother, logic is usually the first thing sacrificed. Jordan called me on Tuesday night, 18 months ago. His voice carried a particular tone, a tone I knew far too well, the sound of needing something expensive. Mom, I have wonderful news. Kyla said yes. My son was engaged. Even though I knew exactly where this conversation would lead, the mother in me could not hide her joy. A month later, the real conversation finally took place. Here's the thing, Mom, Jordan said, drumming his fingers on the kitchen table. Kyla's family has certain expectations. Her sister got married at the Four Seasons, 300 guests. I stayed silent. In business, silence is the most powerful weapon. The venue Kyla wants is about $200,000, not counting flowers, music, photography. $200,000, I repeated. I know it sounds like a lot, but Kyla is the one. I want to give her everything she deserves. And you? What do you think you deserve? That question flickered through my mind, but I did not say it aloud. Looking at Jordan, 31 years old but with eyes still as naive as a boy's, I felt my heart once again defeat my reason. Have you talked to Kyla about a smaller wedding? You do not understand, Mom. Her family is wealthy. Her father owns Benton Rowe Holdings. The irony. My son was saying that to the very person quietly owning that company. I just want to be worthy of her, Jordan said. Those 6 seemingly harmless words shattered my heart. I had raised my son to believe he deserved everything, and yet today he believed he was not enough. Jordan, if she loves you, a simple courthouse ceremony is enough. Please, Mom, I am not asking you to pay everything. Just help us. Get started. Once my career takes off, I will pay you back. His career. Jordan worked at a mid-level consulting firm. Decent income, but nowhere near enough to sustain the Benton family lifestyle. How much do you need? Maybe $200, $300 at most. $300,000 sat between us like an uninvited guest. Jordan, that is the amount many people work 5 years to earn. I know, but you can afford it, right? And after Dad, the life insurance. Jordan stopped, realizing how cruel his own words sounded. Hearing my son calculate the value of his father's life made me sick. I will think about it. That night, I sat alone in Richard's study, staring at his photograph. What would you do? I already knew the answer. Richard had always been too generous with Jordan. He never denied our son anything. The next morning, I called Jordan and told him I agreed. And now, looking back, that yes was the first crack. The point where my sacrifice began to turn into something else, a dangerous power they were about to face. Because in just a few days, on Monday morning, I would be the one in charge of the Benton family's empire. And they were about to learn a lesson they never saw coming. My generosity always has limits. The Buckhead Plaza Hotel gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers. 300 guests, roses imported from Ecuador, a 6-piece jazz band playing the most expensive standards. Every single thing, every detail, was paid for by me. "Mom!" Jordan waved, Kyla standing beside him in an $80,000 Vera Wang gown. "Come here. I want you to meet Kyla's family." Charles Benton Sr., 60, silver hair combed neatly, in a 3-piece suit, looked at me with a cold, appraising gaze, the kind of look people reserve for the help. "Mrs. Rowe, Jordan has told me a lot about you," he said. Denise Benton, in a blush-pink Oscar de la Renta gown, gave me a classic Southern Belle smile. "It is lovely to meet the groom's mother," she said lightly. "Kyla has told us so much about you." There was something in the way she stressed so much that made my skin crawl. Kyla pulled at my hand. "Dr. Rowe," she said, her tone sounding more mocking than respectful. "The girls want to meet you." She led me over to a group of young women, designer clothes from head to toe, glittering jewelry, eyes and attitudes dripping with arrogance. "Ladies," Kyla raised her champagne glass, her voice pitched high enough for the whole group to hear clearly. "This is my mother-in-law, Dr. Celeste Rowe." Then she said it. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce the fat old pig we all have to endure today." Everything stopped. A few people burst out laughing. Some others whispered. Jordan stood 10 steps away, his face pale, but he did not move. My son stood still. He did not defend his mother. Then suddenly, Charles Benton shot to his feet. His face went white, as if he had seen a ghost. "Wait," he stammered. "Are you not Dr. Celeste Rowe, the new CEO of my company?" A wave of silence washed across the room like red wine spilled on a white tablecloth. Kyla's eyes widened. "Dad, what are you talking about?" "Jordan's mother," Charles repeated, his voice tight, "is Dr. Celeste Rowe, the new CEO, the person the board just elected last week." Denise sprang up, her smile still frozen in place, but panic flaring in her eyes. "Oh my. What an interesting coincidence. You share a last name with my family's company." "It is not a coincidence, ma'am," I said calmly. "I kept my husband's name after he passed. Benton Rowe Holdings is my late husband's family company. I inherited his shares when he died." A simple equation. Controlling shares, voting power, hiring power, firing power. Kyla stammered, "You mean you own my father's company?" "Not own, dear," I said. "Control. Those are two very different things." Jordan finally rushed over, sensing the pressure spreading through the room. "Mom, what is going on?" I looked at the son I had raised alone, worked 2 jobs for so he could get his MBA, paid for his car, his apartment, and now his wedding. And I realized he was standing closer to his wife than to his mother. "Everything is fine, sweetheart. I am just getting acquainted with the new family." Charles tried to steady himself. "Dr. Rowe, perhaps we should meet next week. Monday morning, 9 sharp. My assistant will send you the address." I turned to Kyla, giving her the warmest smile I could. "Congratulations on your wedding, Kyla dear. We will be seeing a lot more of each other." As I walked away, I heard Kyla whisper behind me, "Why did you not tell me she was important?" Denise replied in a panic, "Your father said Jordan's mother was just a middle-class widow." A middle-class widow, a cheap label for a woman they knew nothing about. Have you ever experienced a moment when a single sentence stripped bare everything people truly thought of you? A moment when you realized that all these years you were only a side character in their story? Yes, that was my moment. But what they did not know was that behind my silence was a power they had never accounted for. I locked the bathroom door and looked straight into the mirror. Elegant dress, jewelry simple but real, makeup flawless, despite the emotional earthquake that had just hit. In that mirror, I saw the woman who had spent 30 years building an empire to honor her husband. The woman who had worked herself to exhaustion to raise a child, pay tuition, car payments, rent, and for the wedding that day. And I also saw the woman who had just been called a pig by people who had no idea that with one signature I could bring their entire world crashing down. Most importantly, I saw a woman who finally understood her true power. My phone buzzed. Board meeting moved to Tuesday. Emergency personnel matters on Monday. I smiled and reapplied my lipstick. Monday morning was going to be very interesting. Atlanta's morning air was crisp. I put on my power suit, minimal jewelry, hair in a high bun, the hairstyle that had made the southeastern business world wary for 2 decades. At exactly 9, I walked into the boardroom of Benton Rowe Holdings. Charles Benton was seated, flipping his phone over and over like a teenager in trouble. "Dr. Rowe, thank you for seeing me so early," he said. "Mr. Benton?" I replied, setting my briefcase on the table. "Before we begin, we need to clarify a few things." I opened the briefcase and pulled out a folder of stock certificates, board resolutions, and legal documents. As of last Monday, I own 51% of Benton Rowe Holdings. This is my boardroom, and you work for me. Charles's face drained of color, then went slack. "This company has been in my family for 3 generations. Yes, built on land and capital provided by my husband's grandfather in 1952. Your grandfather was a minor partner. The contract is very clear." I slid a manila envelope across the table. "Here is the original contract." His hand shook as he turned the pages. "This cannot be." "What is impossible," I said, "is that you failed to notice that for 15 years I have been quietly buying back your family's company. What do you want?" "First," I said, "I want an apology for Kyla's behavior at the wedding." "Kyla was a bit impulsive?" "Kyla called me a pig, Mr. Benton, in front of 200 guests. At 28, she is old enough to understand consequences." I leaned forward. "Kyla will call me today, and she will apologize sincerely, not because you told her to, but because she has learned that respect is not optional." Charles nodded repeatedly. I will talk to her." "Second, we are restructuring employee benefits. What you have been doing is shameful." 300 employees, mediocre insurance, a retirement plan that was practically non-existent. "The additional cost will be about $2 million a year," I said coolly. "Consider it my social contribution." $2 million? We cannot. I have already reviewed the profit margins. I placed the financial report on the table. You can easily afford it. "Third," I continued, "Jordan, your son-in-law, will be promoted to senior associate. He is perfectly capable when he actually focuses." I did not know Jordan worked here." "He does not yet. His first day is Wednesday." Charles stared at me as if I had just announced I was taking over the entire state of Georgia. "I need to speak with human resources, with legal—" "Your lawyer reviewed the paperwork last week." I stood, closing my briefcase. "Benefits announcement, Thursday. Kyla's apology, today. Jordan's promotion, effective immediately." At the door, I turned back. "Mr. Benton, the next time your family talks about the middle-class widow their daughter married into, remember that this widow now controls their primary source of income." His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Have a good day." I walked out of that room and into my new empire. By noon, my assistant reported 6 calls from the Benton family, 3 from their lawyers, and a string of panicked messages from Kyla. "Dr. Rowe, this is Kyla. There are some misunderstandings about the company. I would like to discuss them as a family. No mention of the word pig, not a single apology. At 2 in the afternoon, The second message. Dr. Rowe, my comment may have been inappropriate. I was nervous and spoke without thinking. I hope you can understand. Still no apology. Still playing the victim. 4:30 in the afternoon. The third message. Dr. Rowe, please call me back. I think we started off on the wrong foot and I want to fix it. Jordan is very upset. My father is panicking. I just want to understand what is going on. I deleted all 3 messages. I did not respond. An apology must carry weight. And these were nothing but fear. Jordan called me on a Tuesday night, his voice carrying that exact tone I knew too well. The kind of tone that only appeared when he needed something. Very expensive. Mom, I have amazing news. Kyla said yes. I was reviewing the quarterly report in my home office, but I immediately closed my laptop. My son was engaged. Regardless of everything else, the mother part of me lit up first. Oh, sweetheart, that's wonderful. When did you propose? Last night at Aria. You remember that fancy place in Buckhead you took me to when I finished my MBA? I remembered perfectly. That night, the bill was $400 for just the 2 of us. But seeing Jordan's face glowing with his MBA in hand, every cent had felt worth it. Tell me everything, I said, leaning back in my chair, allowing myself to set aside the CEO role for a moment and just be a mother, listening to her child brag about his happiness. For nearly an hour, Jordan recounted every detail, the romantic proposal, the meal, the ring, worth more than many people's cars, and how Kyla burst into tears and threw her arms around him. The only thing he did not mention was how they planned to pay for the wedding. That conversation came a month later. Here's the thing, Mom, Jordan said, his fingers tapping lightly on my kitchen table. Kyla's family has certain expectations. I poured him more coffee, watching the way he avoided my eyes. After so many years raising him on my own, I knew every single one of Jordan's tells by heart. What kind of expectations? Kyla's sister got married at the Four Seasons, 300 guests, very classy. I'm sure it was beautiful. Kyla's cousin had his wedding at the Ritz-Carlton Buckhead. Kyla says she's dreamed of a wedding like that since she was a little girl. I stayed silent. In business, silence is often the strongest negotiation tool. In a family, sometimes it is even more powerful. The venues she's looking at are around 200,000, Jordan said quickly. That's just the basics. It doesn't include flowers, music, photography, and all the other stuff. 200,000, I repeated, keeping my voice steady. I know it sounds like a lot, but Mom, Kyla is the one. I want to give her everything she deserves. And what do you think you deserve, Jordan? I thought silently. What do you think you deserve after I have sacrificed almost everything just to give you the best possible start? But then I looked at my son's face, so full of hope, his eyes still holding that boyish recklessness even at 31, and a familiar feeling washed over me. Once again, a mother's love defeated logic. Have you talked to Kyla about a smaller wedding? You don't understand. Her family, they're really rich, Mom. Very rich. Her father owns Benton Row Holdings. Oh, the irony. My son had no idea that for years I had been quietly accumulating shares in Charles Benton's company, slowly moving toward the goal my husband had always dreamed of when he was alive. Control. And you feel pressured to live up to their lifestyle? I asked. I want to be worthy of her, he answered simply. Those 6 words cut straight into my heart. I had raised this child to believe he was worthy of anything and anyone, simply because he was himself, and yet somehow he had come to believe that love required a price tag. If you have ever been a mother or a father who sacrificed everything for your child, only to realize one day that in their eyes, their own worth is tied to money, to fancy restaurants, to 5-star hotels, then you understand that feeling. It is not just sadness. It feels like someone has taken everything you gave and turned it against you. Jordan, If she truly loves you, a courthouse wedding is enough. Mom, please, I'm not asking you to pay for everything. Just help us get started. I'll pay you back when my career takes off. His career. Jordan had been out of his MBA program for a year, working at a mid-tier consulting firm. The income was decent, but nowhere near enough to sustain the lifestyle he had grown used to by stepping into Kyla's family's world. How much help do you need from me? Maybe $250,000, $300 at most. $300,000. That number sat between us like an uninvited guest. Jordan, that's more money than a lot of people make in 5 years. I know, but you can afford it, right? Your business is doing well. And after Dad, with his life insurance. He faltered, the sentence trailing off, as if he himself realized he had just crossed an invisible line. Richard's death had indeed left me with a solid financial foundation, but hearing my own son reduce his father's life to a usable pool of money made me feel sick. I need to think about it, I said. That night, I sat in Richard's study, which I had kept almost exactly the same, the bookshelves, the desk lamp, the old files, and his photograph on the table. We had built Benton Row Holdings from a single office building, then through shrewd acquisitions and restructuring, turned it into one of the leading commercial real estate firms in Atlanta. After Richard died, I did not just preserve his legacy, I expanded it. I closed the deals he had once only drafted. I turned his vision into reality. What would you do, Richard? I asked his photograph softly, but I already knew the answer. Richard had always been too generous with Jordan, almost incapable of denying his son anything. It was one of the few things we had ever argued about as a couple. The next morning, I called Jordan and said a single word. Okay. I agreed to pay. Standing in the bathroom on the wedding day, after my daughter-in-law called me a pig, I finally realized that one okay was the starting point. The moment I shifted from a mother who was used to sacrificing unconditionally into a very different kind of woman, more dangerous, more clear-eyed, and no longer easy to exploit, because come Monday morning, I would be their new boss. And unlike my son, the Benton family was about to learn that my generosity always has limits. But before I tell you how that Monday morning unfolded, I need to talk about another secret. A secret that, even in that moment as I sat at Richard's desk, agreeing to spend $300,000 on a wedding, I had absolutely no idea about. I did not yet know that while I was patiently gathering percentage after percentage of stock to take back control of the company from the Benton family, my son was slowly destroying his own life. I did not know that Jordan had been fired from his consulting firm 6 months earlier for falsifying expense reports. I did not know that he had stopped making payments on his BMW since January, and the bank was preparing to repossess the car. And I certainly did not know that he had forged my signature on loan applications, secretly borrowing around $120,000 against credit in my name. I did not know, but I was about to find out very soon. And once the truth was laid out on the table, not just the wedding, not just the company, but everything I thought I knew about my son would change, forever. On Saturday night, I invited Jordan and Kyla over for dinner. The table was set for 3 only, with my finest china and polished silverware. If this had to be a confrontation, then at the very least it would take place in a civilized manner. They arrived right at 7, but they looked more like they were walking into a funeral than a family dinner. Kyla's eyes were swollen and red, as if she had just finished crying, and Jordan wore the exact same expression he had as a boy whenever he knew he was in trouble, but had absolutely no idea how to fix it. "Mom, thank you for agreeing to see us," he said. "Of course, you are always welcome here." Dinner passed in a haze of awkward small talk. I had prepared roast chicken, Jordan's childhood favorite, served with mashed potatoes and green beans. All of it comfort food from the days when he was little. The dinners after a bad day at school, after a lost basketball game, after a clumsy first breakup. But tonight, Jordan barely touched his plate. I let them sit in that tense silence for about 15 minutes before I finally set my fork down, lifted my head, and looked straight at my son. "Jordan, we need to talk about something that has been weighing on me." His face went pale. "What is it, Mom?" "Kyla told me about the conversation you two had about my personality. Specifically, your concerns about me being controlling and manipulative." All the color drained completely from Jordan's face as he realized what his wife had told me. "Mom, that's not what You were preparing her for me. Is that it, Jordan?" Jordan glanced desperately at Kyla. She kept her eyes locked on her plate, as if it contained the solution to every problem in the world. "Mom, you're always generous. Maybe too generous. And I didn't want Kyla to feel pressured into accepting your help if it came with conditions." "What conditions, Jordan?" "You know," he said, avoiding my eyes, "the expectation that we have to live the way you approve of." I felt something cold and final settle in my chest. "Can you give me one concrete example of me trying to control your life choices?" "Well, you had opinions about my college major. I suggested that business would be more practical. You chose literature, and I supported you all the way. And you didn't like some of the girls I dated. I disliked exactly one of them, the girl who stole money from your wallet and cheated on you with your roommate. In the end, you agreed with my assessment." Jordan shrank back in his chair, realizing that the examples he was offering did not support his case at all. I stood up, walked over to the window, and looked out at the backyard, the place where Richard and I had planted every bed of flowers together, where Jordan used to run and play when he was small. "Do you remember the first time you fell off your bike, Jordan?" I asked, still facing away from them. "You were 6. I had just taken off the training wheels." I turned back and looked directly into his eyes. "You fell hard, scraped your knees bloody. You cried and begged me to put the training wheels back on. Your father said no. He told you that if we put the training wheels back, you would never learn how to balance." Jordan remembered. I could see it in his eyes. "But after your father died, I could no longer bear watching you hurt. Every time you stumbled, I wanted to catch you before you hit the ground. Every time you struggled, I wanted to fix it before you ever had to wrestle with it yourself." I went back to the table and sat down. "The problem is, sweetheart, by never letting you fall, I also never taught you how to stand up on your own." "The problem is," Jordan said quietly, "I just wanted Kyla to know she doesn't have to accept help from you if it makes her uncomfortable." "Except she already has. Both of you have. $300,000 worth of help." "And we are grateful." "No, Jordan. You are not grateful. You are resentful." I got up, my voice still dangerously calm, even as anger smoldered underneath. "I know you resent the fact that every time I help you, it reminds you that you are not successful enough to handle things yourself. Every time I pay a bill, your pride gets bruised, and instead of telling me the truth, that you need to learn to stand on your own, you chose to make me the villain in your story. That's not... You told Kyla that I am controlling, that I treat you like a child, that I use money to maintain power over your life." My voice grew hoarse. "But what is the truth, Jordan? The truth is, I tried to fill the hole your father left by giving you everything, and in doing so, I stole from you the chance to become the man he wanted you to be." Kyla finally lifted her head, tears streaming down her face. "Because I told them what Jordan told me about you," she whispered, "about how you use money to make sure you still have a say in his life when he just wants to be independent." Those words hung in the air like toxic gas. "I see," I said. I stood and walked over to the china cabinet, opening the bottom drawer where I kept old family photos. I pulled out one, Jordan at 12, standing between Richard and me in the hospital 3 weeks before he died. "Do you remember this day?" I handed the photo to Jordan. He looked at it, his eyes reddening. "That was the last time we took a family picture." Yes, your father knew that day was one of his last, and do you know what he said to me when you went to get water? Jordan shook his head. He said, Celeste, do not turn Jordan into a project. Turn him into a man. I looked down at my husband's face in the picture, but I didn't listen. I could not listen, because when he died, you became everything I had left, and I was terrified that if I was not perfect, if I did not give you everything, I would lose you too. If you are a parent, perhaps you have made the same mistake I did, loving your child so much that you confuse love with rescue. You pay off the first debt, excuse the first lie, cover the first mistake, all in the name of protecting them. But every time you do that, you are not just clearing the road for them. You are quietly digging the very pit that one day they and you will both fall into together. So all the times I helped you study, helped you buy a car, paid for your apartment, paid for your wedding, in your eyes, that is manipulation, not love. Mom, you know that's not what I meant. Actually, Jordan, I think that is exactly what you meant. I turned back to face them both. And you know what? You are right. Both Jordan and Kyla froze. I did use money to hold on to this relationship, but starting tomorrow, that ends. Mom, what do you mean, ends? Jordan's voice cracked. I mean, I will no longer be an ATM, sweetheart. No more birthday checks, Christmas gifts, emergency loans, or quiet transfers to cover your bills. As of today, you are officially, financially independent. You cannot be serious. I am completely serious. You want independence from my manipulation, and I am granting it, effective immediately. Kyla looked as if she had just swallowed a stone. Dr. Rowe, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We never said we did not want your support. No, dear. You two only said that I use that support to control your lives. That is fine. The issue is now very clearly resolved. Jordan shot to his feet. This is insane. You are cutting us off completely over one stupid comment at the wedding? One stupid comment? My voice turned icy. Jordan, your wife called me a fat old pig at your wedding, in front of her family laughing hysterically, based on the story you told them, that I am an annoying burden they all have to put up with. I never called you a burden. You told her I cling too tightly, that I treat you like a child, that I use money to keep control. I raised my hand and counted each point on my fingers. What would you call that description, if not a burden? I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts to my attorney's number. Mom, please, we can get through this together. Oh, we are definitely getting through it, just not in the way you expected. I hit call and turned on speaker so they could both hear. Celeste, it's good to hear from you. How was the wedding? My attorney Margaret asked on the other end. If we call it an expensive lesson, that would be more accurate, Margaret. I am calling because I need to make some changes to my estate plan. There was a brief silence on the line, the kind of silence from someone who understands this is not a social call. Of course. What do you want to change? I want to remove my son as primary beneficiary and establish a charitable foundation instead. Jordan leapt to his feet so fast his chair toppled backward. Mom, you cannot be serious. Margaret, did you hear that? My son seems surprised to learn that his actions actually have consequences. And then Jordan did something I did not expect. He did not scream. He did not slam the table. He did not storm out. He stood there, took a deep breath, then pulled a manila envelope from his jacket pocket. The same envelope I had not noticed earlier. Mom, before you do that, there is something you need to know. His voice was different, no longer angry or defiant, but carrying the raw desperation of someone standing on the edge of a cliff, fully aware he is about to fall with nowhere left to go. Jordan? I asked softly, my heart beginning to pound. You are right about everything. About me being resentful. About me using you. About me blaming you instead of looking at myself. He placed the envelope on the table, his hands shaking. But things are worse than you think. Much worse. What are you talking about, Jordan? I am not just a bad son, Mom. His voice broke. I am a fraud. Kyla turned to her husband, eyes wide. Jordan, what are you? Kyla doesn't know anything, Jordan said quickly. No one knows. But now, you are about to know everything. I opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a stack of papers, copies of bank statements, loan documents, emails, and what looked like correspondence between Jordan and various financial institutions. Jordan, what am I looking at? Evidence, he whispered. Evidence that I am not just an ungrateful son. I am a criminal. The room seemed to spin. I sank back into my chair and began leafing through the pages. The consulting job I had before going to work at Benton Row, Jordan began, his voice flat, as if he himself could not believe he was saying the words. I didn't get promoted to that new position. I was fired 6 months ago for falsifying expense reports. I felt the blood in my veins turn to ice. I invented business trips that never happened, client dinners that didn't exist. I stole nearly $20,000 from the company over 4 months before they caught me. Jordan, Kyla whispered, her face ghost white. They gave me 2 options, resign quietly or they would call the police. I chose to resign, and I lied to you about why I left. I kept turning the pages, each one worse than the last. The car payments on the BMW that I told you I was handling on my own, Jordan went on. I stopped paying in January. The bank has sent 3 warnings. They were about to repossess it when Kyla's dad took me on, and I used my first month's salary to catch up. But that is still not the worst part. Jordan drew a deep breath. My apartment, the one I am renting. I am 3 months behind on rent. The landlord has started eviction proceedings. Why did you not tell me? I whispered. Because I was ashamed. And because... He swallowed hard. Because I found another way to get money. A way I thought you would never discover. I looked down at the next page, and my heart stopped. Loan applications, 8 different files, all listing me as the co-signer, and the signature on each one was not mine. You forged my signature. This time, it was not a question, but a statement. Yes. How many times? 8 loans over 7 months. His voice was as small as a child's. You have perfect credit, a strong business reputation. The banks barely checked. They just saw the name Dr. Celeste Rowe and approved. How much money in total, Jordan? In total, he swallowed again. $87,000 in unsecured debt. $32,000 on the car loan. Another $20,000 from credit cards I opened using your information. $139,000. My son had stolen nearly $140,000 from his own mother by impersonating her. And the engagement ring? I asked, my voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. The ring you said cost $80,000? Jordan looked at Kyla, who was staring at the ring on her hand as if it were some foreign object. The ring actually cost $12,000. I borrowed $20,000, said it was for the ring, and used the remaining $8,000 to cover other loans that were coming due. Kyla slipped the ring off and set it on the table as if it were burning hot. There is something you have to understand, Jordan said, the words spilling out now as if he had tried to cage them for far too long. I never meant for it to get this bad. At first, it was just one small loan to get through a month after I lost my job. I thought I would find a new job quickly, pay it back, and you would never know. But you did not find a new job quickly. No. And then I met Kyla. Her family. They really are rich, Mom. And I did not want her to know I was struggling, so I took out a bit more, and then a bit more. By the time I realized, I was in so deep, I could not see a way out. So when you told Kyla that I am controlling and manipulative, I said slowly, you were actually describing yourself. Yes. He nodded, eyes closing. I projected everything I was doing onto you because I could not bear to look at the truth. I had become the kind of man I used to despise. I stood and walked over to the window again, forcing my breathing to stay even while my entire world rearranged itself around me. Outside, the streetlights had come on, dusk giving way to night. Atlanta hummed on, completely unaware that in this house, a family was cracking apart at the foundation. "And the wedding money?" I asked, still not turning around. "The $300,000 I paid directly to the hotel, to the florist, to the vendors?" "I needed it to keep everything afloat, Mom," Jordan said, his voice breaking. "I owed so many people. The loans were coming due. I couldn't borrow more in your name because you were about to come under scrutiny from the credit bureaus, so I needed the wedding money to maintain appearances just long enough until I found a long-term solution." "What was your long-term solution, Jordan?" I turned back to him. "Keep borrowing forever? Keep lying forever?" "I don't know," he burst out sobbing. "I don't know, okay? Every day I woke up terrified. Every single morning I thought, today is the day Mom finds out. Today is the day everything collapses. I hated myself for what I was doing to you, but I didn't know how to stop." For the first time since the conversation began, I saw my son, not the image of a successful man he had tried to construct, but the lost, terrified boy that somehow I had failed to notice he had become. And a part of me, the part that always saw the 12-year-old boy crying beside his father's hospital bed, wanted nothing more than to pull him into my arms, to tell him everything would be all right, that I would fix it like I had always done. But in my mind, I heard Diane's voice. "Failure is how we learn, and Jordan has never been allowed to truly fail." "I have to call my lawyer back," I said, turning to face them both again. "We need legal advice on how to handle this." "Mom, please." Jordan stepped closer, then dropped to his knees. He actually knelt on my kitchen floor, the same floor where he used to play with toy cars, where I had taught him to bake cookies, where we had shared more dinners than I could count. "If this becomes public, it will destroy my marriage, my career, everything. Please, I will do anything. I will pay back every cent. I will work 2 jobs, 3 jobs. Just please, do not let me go to prison." I looked down at my son, kneeling on the cold tile, and I understood. This was the deciding moment, not for Jordan, for me. I could save him one more time, hide his crimes, clean it all up quietly, pretend it had all been a misunderstanding. In doing so, I would ensure he never had to truly face the consequences of what he had done. Or I could do what Richard had wanted me to do 19 years ago, let Jordan become a man, not a lifelong rescue project. "Get up, Jordan," I said softly. "Mom, get up." He stood, shoulders slumped, eyes swollen and red. "I am going to call the attorney. We are going to find out what needs to be done legally. But Jordan, there is one thing you need to understand. The days of me saving you from every consequence are over. You did this. You will have to live with it. And if that means losing your job, your apartment, everything, then that is the price you will pay." "But there is no but," I said firmly. "This time, you will learn what I should have taught you long ago, that actions always have consequences, that you cannot lie your way to success, that real love sometimes means letting the person you love face the truth about who they have become." I picked up my phone. "And do you know what the worst part of all this is, Jordan?" I asked, looking him straight in the eye. "It is not the money. I can earn back the money. The worst part is that for 18 months, you looked me in the eye, let me pay for your wedding, let me tell everyone how proud I was of you, while you knew every single day that you were quietly destroying me from the inside out." I pressed the call button for my attorney. "And that," I said as the line began to ring, "is the part I am not sure I will ever be able to forgive." 2 days later, I sat in the dark wood office of Richard Patterson. Jordan sat beside me, watching his lawyer turn page after page. Every piece of evidence documenting the chain of fraud my own son had committed. He worked with the calm of a man who had seen far too many family disasters, yet still had enough humanity left to be surprised by how far people could fall. Richard, the lawyer, not my late husband, was in his late 60s and had handled all my legal matters for nearly 20 years. He had been there when Richard died, when I fought to regain control of the company, and now he was here again, for this disaster. After nearly an hour of silence, he set the stack of papers down. "The good news," Richard said, "is that if we move quickly and strategically enough, the chances are very high we can avoid criminal charges." Jordan exhaled in relief, but I waited for the rest. "And the bad news?" "The bad news," he said, looking straight at me, "is that if Celeste wants to protect her credit and reputation, she will have to assume full responsibility for the debt. If the banks discover the forged signatures, they will pursue both civil and criminal actions, and they will not clearly distinguish between the person whose identity was stolen and the person who benefited." "You mean, if they find out, I could also be treated as an accomplice," I said. "Exactly. So the safest option is this. You pay off all the debt, close every related account, and most importantly, file an official report with the police stating that you are a victim of identity fraud." "What?" Jordan shot to his feet. "I thought you said there would not be any criminal charges." "Sit down, Jordan," Richard said coolly. "I said we might avoid charges, not that everything would magically disappear. If your mother wants to protect herself long-term, she needs a paper trail proving she is the victim, not a willing participant." I looked at my son. He looked like he might throw up. "Is there no other way?" I asked. "There is," Richard nodded. "You could choose not to report anything, pay the debt, hope no one looks too closely, and accept the risk that a few years from now, some auditor spots irregularities and opens an investigation. At that point, your previous silence will look a lot like concealing a crime." The room sank into silence. "There is one more option," he continued, his voice gentler. "We create an internal agreement. Celeste pays off the debt. Jordan signs a detailed confession, which I keep in my safe. He agrees to repay her according to a strict schedule, submits to financial supervision, and commits to therapy to address the root of the problem." "And if he does not comply?" I asked. "I hand the entire file over to the authorities. This gives Celeste leverage without immediately going to court, and it gives Jordan one chance to prove he wants to change." I looked at the stack of documents accusing my son. $139,000, nearly 7 years' wages for an average worker in Atlanta, almost half the price of the house I had paid off. But more painful than the money was the price of 20 years of lying to myself, the price of loving too much and too blindly, the price of turning my son into a project to fix instead of a man who must answer for his own choices. "All right," I said at last. "I will pay the debt. Jordan will sign the confession, and he will comply with every condition you lay out, Richard, every single one." "Thank you, Mom," Jordan began. "Do not thank me," I cut in. "This is not a favor. This is the last mess I clean up for you. Next time, if there is a next time, you will face all the consequences on your own." Over the next hour, Richard outlined the terms. Jordan would repay me roughly $1,400 a month for 9 years. No delays, no extensions, no reductions. He would meet with a financial counselor every week during the first year, every 2 weeks during the second year, then monthly. He would go to therapy, not just for the money issues, but for all the fractures inside him that had led him here. He would not open any new lines of credit. No cards, no loans, no installment plans. Every major transaction would require approval from the financial counselor, and most importantly, he would tell Kyla the truth, every detail. "I cannot," Jordan protested. "She will leave me." "She might," Richard said calmly, "but she has the right to know who she married. And you need to understand this. Honesty is not a bonus feature. It is the bare minimum. Mom? Jordan turned to me. Mr. Patterson is right. Kyla has to know. And if, after knowing everything, she chooses to leave, then that is just one more consequence you will have to face. 3 days later, Kyla called me. Dr. Rowe, can I come see you? Jordan just told me everything. I need to talk to someone who understands this better than I do. An hour later, Kyla sat in my office. Her eyes were still swollen from crying, but her posture carried a new kind of firmness, not the arrogant strength of privilege, but the strength of someone who has finally woken up. How long have you known about this? She asked. I only found out on Saturday night, the same night I confronted Jordan. 6 days, Kyla shook her head. It has only been 6 days since the wedding, but it feels like a lifetime. She looked down at her bare hand, now without a ring. I found the documents in the home office, she said. He hid them at the bottom of a drawer, under a bunch of random papers, as if shoving them deep enough would make them disappear. Her voice hardened. I sat and read for 3 hours. Every loan, every signature, every lie, each thing lined up in chronological order. I am very sorry you had to find out that way, I said. I think I would rather know than not know. Kyla lifted her eyes to mine. I only regret not seeing it earlier. I was so busy proving I deserved my own family that I never really looked closely at the man I was about to marry. What are you thinking now? I asked. What are you planning to do? That is why I came. I need advice from someone who has had to make a very hard choice. I looked at the young woman who had called me a fat old pig just 1 week earlier. Now she seemed smaller, but more real, like someone who had taken off a mask and was still getting used to her own face. All right, I said. But first, you have to answer honestly. Do you love Jordan? Kyla was silent for quite a while. I think I love the man I thought he was, she said at last. The confident, successful man climbing the career ladder. But that man does not exist. He was just a role Jordan was playing. She paused. As for the man on Saturday night, the one on his knees in the office, confessing everything, I do not know if I can love him, and I do not know if I have the strength to stay and find out. That is a very honest answer, I nodded, and it is a valid reason if you decide to walk away. But? Kyla looked at me. She heard the but. But marriage is not just loving someone when things are easy. The real question is, can you, and do you want to, stand beside a person while they face the worst parts of themselves? If right now you are thinking of the name of a child you keep rescuing, a spouse hiding secrets, or perhaps even yourself, then this is no longer just Celeste's story. Very often the thing that destroys us is not the first mistake, but the 10th, the 20th, the ones that happen after every silence, every quiet forgiveness, every cover-up that allows everything to go on. If you see yourself in Celeste, in Jordan, or in Kyla, listen to the end. You might find yourself somewhere in what comes next. Let me tell you something no one told me when Richard was diagnosed with cancer, I said. Everyone kept saying stay strong, fight for his life. But the hardest part was not fighting. The hardest part was asking myself every day, do I still have enough strength to love someone when that love demands more of me than I ever imagined? So what did you do back then, with Mr. Richard? I chose to stay, I answered. I believed the man I loved deserved someone who would stand beside him, even as he grew weaker, smaller, more afraid each day. I leaned forward. But there is a huge difference here, Kyla. Richard did not choose cancer. It came for him. Jordan chose each step that led him here. Jordan chose to lie, to steal, to blame. So you are telling me I should leave him? No, I am telling you this. You need to be honest with yourself. Can you forgive this? And more importantly, do you believe you will ever truly trust Jordan again? Kyla fell silent, looking out the window where the Atlanta skyline blurred in the afternoon light. There is one thing I do not understand, she said finally. How can you still love Jordan after all of this? Why do you not just cut him off completely? That was the same question I had asked myself every night since Saturday. Because no matter what he does, he is still my son, I said softly. A mother's love does not shut off like a light switch, even when she desperately wishes it could. My voice trembled. But loving Jordan no longer means protecting him. It no longer means saving him from every fall. I have done that for far too long, and you have seen the result. So what are you going to do with him now? I am doing what I should have done long ago. I am letting him fall. And this time, I will not reach out to catch him before he hits the ground. That is his only chance to learn how to stand on his own. Kyla nodded slowly. I think I have to do the same. Let him fall. Stand back and see if he gets up by himself. That is a wise decision, dear. But I cannot do that while we are still living together. I need distance. I need time to remember who I am when I am not the girl who deserves to be a Benton or Jordan's perfect wife. 6 weeks after the night of the confession, I sat in the CEO's office at Benton Row Holdings reviewing the report on Jordan. He had not missed a single counseling session. Not one repayment. He came to the office every day at 8:30, left at 6, and worked with the intensity of someone trying to prove something, to me, to Kyla, or to himself. Charles Benton, who now reported directly to me, told me privately, Jordan is different now. Before, he was all empty confidence. Now he is still confident, but more genuine, more reliable. The reality was that Jordan now lived alone in a one-bedroom apartment in Old Fourth Ward, everything he could afford after rent, repayments, and basic expenses. Kyla had moved back in with her parents and filed for a temporary separation. A text from Jordan appeared on my phone. Mom, can you have lunch with me? I want to update you on a few things. I replied. 12:30, my office. Jordan arrived on time, carrying 2 bags from an old deli we used to frequent. Turkey sandwich for me, potato soup for him. You still remember what I like? I asked. These days I remember a lot, he said with a sad smile. Therapy is forcing me to notice things I never cared about before, because I was always thinking only about myself. A while later, he set his spoon down. Dr. Miller made me write a letter to you, not to send, just to force me to name everything for what it is. And did you write it? I wrote it 5 times and got it wrong every time. Each version was full of excuses, blame, or minimization. He took an envelope from his pocket. This is version number 6. I think this one is finally honest. Do you need me to read it now? I asked. No, not if you are not ready. But there is one thing I want you to know, the thing I think matters most. He took a deep breath. My whole life, I blamed you for what I did not have. I blamed you because I felt inferior to Kyla's family. I blamed you because I could not stand on my own without feeling like I owed someone. But the truth is, everything I lost by my own hand. I had you. I had an education. I had opportunities, and I smashed them into the wall because I was terrified of failing. His voice shook. I told myself a story, that you made me dependent, that you would not let me grow up. But the truth is, I was the one who did not want to grow up, because growing up means taking responsibility. And taking responsibility means that if I fail, there is no one left to blame. Tears welled up in his eyes. It is so much easier to say everything is your fault. That way I never had to look in the mirror and see that the person who ruined everything was me. You are not a failure, Jordan, I said quietly. I have failed, Mom. I failed as a husband, as a son, and as the man my father hoped I would be. He wiped his eyes. But Dr. Miller says that does not make me a failure for life. It only proves that I have failed. The rest depends on what I learn from it, whether I change, whether I choose to become better. Do you believe you can? I asked. I am learning to believe it, he answered. One day at a time, one decision at a time. 3 months later, I was in my home office on a Friday night, reviewing the quarterly report for Benton Rowe Holdings. The numbers were strong. The new benefits program was improving employee retention. Subtle rent adjustments had increased revenue significantly while keeping occupancy high. For the first time in 5 years, the company had exceeded its quarterly projections by a wide margin. Jordan's performance report caught my eye most of all. He had been promoted a second time, entirely on merit, without any intervention from me. He had led the analysis team on a major Buckhead deal impressively. Charles told me privately, "Your boy Jordan is dependable now. Not the best we have, but he is one of the people I assign critical work to without having to lose sleep." The doorbell rang. I opened it to find Jordan with a bag of Chinese takeout and a hesitant look. "I hope I'm not interrupting your Friday night plans," he said. I was thinking about how Friday nights used to be Chinese food and a movie, before I got too busy for my own mother." "Come in," I said. We ate in the living room, the silence this time easy and comfortable. "Kyla met with me this week," Jordan said, "for the first time since she left." "How did it go?" "Hard, but good, and very honest." He paused. I apologized. For the first time, I apologized without adding the word "but." I told her I understood if she never wanted to see me again. But I also told her I am changing, not to win her back, but because it is the right thing to do. And what did Kyla say? She said I seem different, not the man I was on our wedding day. She is not ready to come back, but she is not shutting the door completely either. That is progress, sweetheart. "Mom," Jordan set his takeout box down, "I have to ask you something honestly. Have you forgiven me? Or are you just tolerating me because I'm your son?" I had been preparing for that question for weeks. "The hardest thing about forgiveness, Jordan, is not deciding once," I said. "It is the choice I have to make every day." I looked at him. "Some days I look at you and still see the 12-year-old boy in the hospital hallway. Some days I see only the times you looked me in the eye and lied. But there are days when I look at you and see the man you are trying to become." "And today? What do you see today?" he asked. "Today I see a man learning the hardest lesson of all, that we are not defined by our mistakes, but by what we do after we make them." Tears glimmered in Jordan's eyes. "Are you proud of me, Mom?" I paused for a moment. "I am not proud of what you did, but I am beginning to feel proud of who you are trying to become. And for now, that is enough for me." 6 months after the night I was called a fat pig at my son's wedding, I stood by the large window in the CEO's office, looking out over the Atlanta skyline. Benton Rowe Holdings was thriving. We had just closed the biggest acquisition in the company's history, a midtown tower Jordan had helped negotiate. Charles Benton had retired with a generous package. His son was successful in another industry. The grandson who had once sold me his shares was now doing well with his own startup. Their entire family had learned to adapt. Kyla had come back to Jordan 3 weeks earlier, not because everything was perfect, but because she had decided the man she saw now deserved a second chance. They were in marriage counseling. Progress was slow, but real. Jordan was becoming the man Richard once hoped he would be. Not perfect, not free of fear, but honest, dependable, working hard because it was the right thing to do. He still had 7.5 years of repayments left to me, and had not missed a single month. A text came in from Diane. "Lunch today? I want to hear how my corporate heroine is doing." I smiled and replied, "I am not a heroine, just a woman who finally learned how to let go." A knock sounded on my office door. Jordan stood there, holding a stack of reports and an envelope. "Do you have a minute, Mom?" "I always do. Come in." He handed me the envelope, a proposal to co-sponsor a speech at the Atlanta Business Forum. "I want to talk about failure," Jordan said. "About losing everything before learning what really matters. About my story, from the very beginning. The ugly parts, not just the redemption arc." "You do not have to do that. It will be very public, I know. But Dr. Miller says part of recovery is stopping the hiding. If my story stops even one person before they repeat my mistakes, then the shame will be worth it. I looked at my son, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time in years, and saw a man learning to stand firmly in the truth of his own life. I think that is a very courageous idea, I said, and I want to be there when you speak. I already listed you as co-sponsor, he smiled faintly, because I figured this was never just my story. It is also about a mother who loved too much and a son who did not know how to love himself, about having to lose the image of a perfect family before discovering the real strength underneath. 2 weeks later, I stood at the side of the stage at the Atlanta Business Forum, facing around 300 business leaders. My heart pounded as Jordan stepped up to the microphone. "I am Jordan Rowe," he began, "and 6 months ago, I was the man who forged his own mother's signature to borrow nearly $140,000. I was the husband who lied to his wife about his career and finances. I was the son who blamed the woman who sacrificed everything for him for every one of my failures." The room was utterly silent. But before I tell you how I lost everything, I want to tell you about the person who saved me by letting me fall. He turned and looked at me. "This is my mother, Dr. Celeste Rowe, and this is our story." For 45 minutes, we told everything. No sugarcoating, no omissions. Jordan's fraud, my blindness, the way we nearly destroyed each other with a distorted kind of love. Then we talked about the way back. Not a neat, happy ending, but long days of responsibility, honesty, and difficult conversations. When we finished, we stood side by side. The room was silent for a moment. Then one person began to clap, and soon the entire audience rose to their feet. They did not stand because the story was touching. They stood because of the truth. Sometimes the greatest act of love is not holding on, but letting go at the right time. After the event, a young woman approached us, eyes red. "Thank you," she said. "My son is addicted. I keep covering for him because I am afraid he will collapse if he has to face the consequences. But hearing you today, I realized I am not helping him. I am pushing him deeper." That was the moment I understood that our story mattered more than the shame it carried. 1 year after that fateful night at the wedding, I was back in my home office, sitting in the same old leather chair with a glass of wine and a book. But tonight, I was not alone. Jordan and Kyla were there. Not because they needed me to pay for anything, but because Friday nights had become family night. We had just finished watching The Princess Bride, Richard's favorite film, and now sat in the quiet peace of people who no longer needed to perform. "Do you know what is funny, Mom?" Jordan said. "This past year, painful, humiliating, full of therapy and repayments, has been the best year of my life." "Why?" Kyla asked. "Because for the first time, I am living a real life. No performance, no facade, no trying to prove anything to anyone, just me." He looked at me. "And for the first time, I know for sure, you love me, not for how I look in front of other people, but for who I am, even when I am awful. It is precisely because you are not perfect that I know when you need love the most," I said. My phone buzzed. Emails from a publisher, a podcast, a parenting seminar. I turned it off and set it aside. Tonight was not about opportunities, reputation, or turning pain into a platform. Tonight was simply about 3 people who had come to the edge of breaking and chosen to come back, slowly but honestly. "How about we take a family photo?" Kyla suggested. We sat together on the sofa, me in the middle, Jordan and Kyla on either side. Kyla set the camera timer and hurried back into the frame. "Smile!" But we did not smile the perfect family smile. We just smiled, a quiet smile of people who knew they had been through a storm and were still sitting side by side. Later, when I looked at the photo, I did not see a polished family. I saw a real one, once shattered, pieced back together, full of scars but alive, imperfect but sincere. And I realized that was all I had ever wanted. I am Celeste Rowe, and this is the story of being called a fat pig at my son's wedding, and how that moment of humiliation saved both of us from a life that deep down, neither of us wanted to live anymore. If you are still here, thank you for staying with my story. If you believe stories like this can heal, can awaken someone out there, please help me by clicking like, so the algorithm knows this is content worth sharing, subscribing to the channel, and turning on notifications so you will not miss the next story.